I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm constitutional attorney Catherine Henry, and welcome to this week's episode of Restore Freedom Weekly. Most of what we've done since January, when we started doing it as a weekly series, has been talking about certain topics. For example, there was a House bill we talked about a couple months ago. There's been some court cases in circuit courts around Michigan, in Court of Appeals, the Michigan Supreme Court, and even the U.S. Supreme Court. We've talked about different topics, such as an attorney's oath of office and the supposed allegiance to the British Accredited Registry, which is not a thing. If you think it is, go watch that video. We've talked about... we've talked about a lot of different stuff, but every week it's been primarily me coming to you and explaining to you what's going on and then giving you my take on it. Every now and then I might have pulled in Lori or my husband Mike, but generally they try to hide as far away from being on camera as humanly possible. But today is going to be a little bit different. As most of you know, this weekend is an important weekend in policy, in politics, and quite frankly, in government in the state of Michigan. In other states, if you're watching from another state, I encourage you to keep watching, because you can take some of what we're doing here and use these questions and topics as things to talk about in your own state as this election year progresses. But today's topic is going to be kind of an open-ended one, but one that is geared towards a specific statewide office, that of State Attorney General. And most of you know that the current Attorney General is Dana Nessel, and she is going to be challenged by one of three Republican primary candidates who will be decided shortly. I actually have the pleasure of knowing each of the three. Tom Leonard, I've actually known the longest, for about 7 years or so. Matt DePerno, I've known for a couple of years. And Ryan Berman, I've also known for a couple of years. None of them I've been besties with by any stretch of the imagination, but getting to know them through my work to fight for freedom. So it is without further ado that I want to introduce to you today a very special guest. This is Attorney General candidate Ryan Berman. He is also currently, I believe, state rep for House District 39. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Don't know how I could remember that, because I've never even been there, I'm sure. But of course, we have redistricting and everything, so who knows what number that would have been if you would have stayed running as a state rep. But so today, everyone, for those of you watching, and I'll hop over to the comments part. Let's see. Good morning, Joe, on YouTube, or good afternoon, I should say. I will try to do my best to watch those, as well as usually Lori and Mike help me watch those too. But I'm going to run through a series of questions that, quite frankly, I came up with the specific questions today because of the important topics that we've been discussing. So this isn't a pre-scripted interview in the sense that Ryan doesn't know what we're specifically talking about. I didn't say, hey, I'm going to bring you on and I'm going to ask you about this, this, and this. I just wanted to talk to him about generally important issues that would affect the state of Michigan, and that certainly we need to hear what a candidate for the next Michigan AG would have to say about him. So before we get started with all of that, though, Ryan, could you share with people maybe even just 30 to 60 seconds about who you are as a person, and then maybe another 30 seconds or so about your career getting up to this point?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me. And, like you said, I don't know how you guessed the 39th district, and with redistricting, I think it's going to be, I'm in the new 20th district. The 39th is now on the west side of the state. So it's Rep. Pauline Wenzel is running in the new 39th district. I was actually at an event in Kalamazoo recently, and they said somebody, running for the 39th. And I'm like, that's my district. I'm like, oh yeah, wait, that's this whole redistricting thing is, and that's a whole nother conversation. I think, I don't know if you've touched on here, the scam of the independent commission and how gerrymandered these districts are now, much worse than ever before.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? I've had the pleasure of being a state representative now in my second term, and knowing Catherine with her work on freeing Michigan over Governor Whitmer's lockdowns. And we've had many conversations, hours long, of tactics and techniques and going into court. And I applaud everything that she did as an individual, standing up for our rights and our freedoms, and her help in helping me with my caucus. And I was one of the lead fighters there to get them to file lawsuits to go against Governor Whitmer. When this whole pandemic happened, in fact, I've been fighting for years now, mainly against my own caucus, unfortunately. And one of the reasons I'm running for attorney general, when Governor Whitmer locked down our state, did these unconstitutional mandates, where was our attorney general safeguarding our civil rights and liberties? Not only did she step aside and let Whitmer do whatever she wanted, but even after the Supreme Court ruled that what was going on was unconstitutional, she still continues to go after people who defied lockdown, rightfully defied these orders, going after them administratively, and it's absolutely wrong. And that's one of the reasons, with my background and credentials, experience, that I had to step forward to take out a sitting incumbent attorney general, which is an uphill battle, but we need the right message, the right messenger. And I was the number one targeted district. Control of the Michigan House had to go through my district. So the Dems targeted me, and it was the most expensive House race in our state's history. They spent close to $2 million, which is in any other realm statewide money, to unseat me. And a lot of it was because they said I'm too conservative for my moderate district, right? I stood up against Governor Whitmer and her nursing home policies. I sponsored a resolution opposing that passed the House, fighting against the Democrats. I sponsored the resolution against defunding the police. I was one of the first representatives. Rep. Bo LaFave did articles of impeachment to have impeachment proceedings over to Governor Whitmer and her handling of the pandemic, and I signed on. And everybody in Lansing and leadership was like, Berman, you can't do this. You can't go against the governor. You're going to lose. She's polling too high in your district. And I said, well, I'm going to stand up for what's right, and where the chips fall, that's what happens. I'm here for a reason. God put me in this place for a reason, and I'm going to use my position and my voice to advocate for my constituents, but also advocate for the Constitution. And coming back in my district, where I'm in this 50-50 type district, it went for President Trump barely in 2016. It overwhelmingly went for Governor Whitmer, and it just went for Joe Biden. 45% of people, they're voting Democrat no matter what. 45% of people, though, are voting Republican. It's that 5 to 10% in the middle, the soft Democrats, soft Republicans, the independents that sway these elections. And that's what my district consists of. And she was polling great. They did actually, and it was really, amazing. And I would knock on Republicans' doors even, that were happy with how Whitmer was treating it, because the media propaganda had them afraid. Fear is a big tool, especially, this motivating factor, and they try to manipulate. And that's what they frankly did in our elections, trying to manipulate the outcome through this propaganda. But, I flipped the script, right? It's all about not what you say, it's how you say it, but it's all about messaging. And I said, whether you agree or disagree with Whitmer, that's not the issue. She could have a lot of people say, oh, she's coming from a good place. She has these altruistic motives. I said, listen, she's not my mother. She's not your mother. We have a system in place, a constitution that has checks and balances, co-equal branches. Power properly belonging to one branch cannot be properly exercised by another. Whether you agree or disagree, that's not the issue. Is it up to her? Is it up to one person to make these decisions? We left England in English rule in a monarchy because of that. And that message resonated. And thankfully, and with a lot of hard work and the right message, I won. And I'm in this position now in my second term. And yeah, I mean, I remember talking with you, Catherine, over the phone, and the leadership was going to extend Gretchen's powers on April 30th up to the last minute. And there was a handful of us, a handful of representatives that were constantly fighting with some backlash against that. And I said, it's not going to be an easy vote. I'm going to go and put all of you on blast, and I'm going to make it a big deal. And ended up getting in fight with the leadership at the time. And what Lee Chatfield said in these meetings, who was the Speaker of the House at the time, is, well, if we don't extend her powers, if we don't give her that authority to extend her powers, she's going to do it anyways, unilaterally, and it's going to make us look weak. I said, no, Lee. What's going to make us look weak if we go along with it. Just if you think, because you think you're going to lose the fight, you think she's going to do it anyways. It's kind of like the argument if a bully is going to come and take your lunch money every day and you know they're going to do it, and you just don't put up a fight and hand it to them. That's not the way I was raised. That's not the way Americans are. You put up a fight. You punch that bully in the face, and if you end up losing, you make it hard. You make it difficult for them to do that. But at the end of the day, I was confident that if the Supreme Court did its jobs and looked at the Constitution and ruled the way that what the law says, and not politically, unfortunately, politics gets swayed and enveloped in everything, that we would win. We lost at the circuit court level. We lost at the Court of Appeals. Thankfully, and it was on my birthday, actually, got a good birthday present when the Supreme Court announced that ruling, that vindicating my position all along a month before the election, that, hey, what she's doing is, in fact, unconstitutional and wrong.
So before we get too far, I wanted to kind of let people know about who you are as a person and not just your role that way. But correct me if I'm wrong. You've been married for quite some time, and I believe your wife's birthday was in the last week or so.
Yeah, a couple days ago during this time. So yeah, I met my wife up in Michigan State, did Michigan State undergrad, Wayne State for law school. She met her there, but she happens to be from this same town growing up in, and now I know you're in Florida, and my family, I have a lot of family in Florida, and her parents actually have a place like a few miles away from my dad in Florida. So
that's
kind of like, hey, this is serendipitous, but it's worked out, and we've been dating married now for 16 years, dating for 5 before that. So we're going on our 22 years together.
And you have 2 kids?
Yeah, 2 beautiful daughters, and they're now 14 and 13. 8th and 9th grade, so they're freshmen in high school. I feel really old, and
you feel old. Wait a minute. Now, just to be clear, of my 4 kids, I have Emma, who's 8, but I have an 18-year-old, an almost 19-year-old, and a 20-year-old. So if you're old, then I don't want to know what that makes me. So although we'll say it's my husband who's the old man, everybody should know that's true. I'm so.
Yeah, you know what? It's one of those things that I grew up. I have an older brother, and so, and my father they were all boys, the family. My mom's side, there was 5 boys, 2 girls. It was just more boys around kind of thing. And all the grandkids, all my cousins were boys, and then until later in life. But I had a daughter. And I'm like, oh, how am I going to deal with a daughter? What am I going to do? Like, I'm a wrestler. I'm a fighter. I'm into mixed martial arts. I'm a gun guy. That's actually what brought me in to the Republican
Party. Girls do guns too, though.
Yeah, well, that's what I found out, right? So it's like I'm the gun guy, Second Amendment shooting, and people said, it's like, hey, your daughters are just the greatest thing. They're easier than boys, but just wait until they're in middle school, you know. And my daughters were easy. They were great. And now they're in middle school. And they're at the point where everybody warned me about. It's like, wait until middle school.
It's just starting. Oh, you just wait. Yeah,
and now
you're
I understand. I understand why people say that. And I'm saying that to my friends who are having babies. Oh, daughters are the best. Just wait until middle school, though. Enjoy it now. Enjoy it while it lasts. But no, my daughters are just awesome.
I'm sorry. I have to comment. There's somebody so rudely making a comment here that he thinks he has a kid who's almost 40. Dad, I'm not almost 40. Thank you. Almost 40 would be like 2 years from now. I would be almost 40, but you better take that comment back. I'm just saying. Okay. Sorry, Ryan. That was extremely important. I had to make a comment about that.
Definitely understand that.
Now, for my dad, he has the saving grace of my baby sister on, let's see, Sunday will turn 23. So, yeah, whereas my husband's oldest sibling, I believe, is 51. So, yeah, we have, you know, that's why I say he's the old guy. I'm the young one. But anyway, good. I wanted to at least tell people who you are, at least to some degree as a person, because that's important. You know, we often look at candidates, especially statewide races, and we're like, oh, you know, that's just a politician. That's just a lawyer. That's just whatever. And we forget to look at who they are as people, because who they are as people helps form who they are going to be in that particular role should they win the race. So, absolutely. For example, State Rep Steve Johnson, who is in the Dortown. Anyway, he's in, you know, the Kent Allegan area. He and I were running in neighboring districts back initially in 2015, 2016, and I met him then. And he, you know, he's just a really young guy, and he'd never been married, and he doesn't have kids, and I assume he still doesn't, but he didn't back then for sure. You know, fresh out of, you know, military and college, and it was like, wow, the one biggest complaint I heard because he and I were very similar ideologically, the one biggest complaint I heard when he and I would be at the same type of events was, well, he doesn't have enough life experience to do a good job. So to the people that hold that kind of viewpoint, I wanted to let them know, yes, you are old enough, and you do have some life experience being married for so long and raising teenagers. You're definitely, if you can raise teenage girls, 2 teenage girls in this era, you could probably do just about anything. So anyway, so at least we got that in there. And I guess one thing I wanted to say at the beginning, but I kind of forgot to do that, is there's a couple of reasons why I thought it would be important to do this. And let me be clear to the audience that I did initially make this offer to all 3 AG candidates, so Tom and Matt as well, a couple months ago. And, you know, I'm not here to say anything bad about individuals, but let me just say there's a reason why we're focusing all of the time in this episode on Ryan. And, you know, at some point I was thinking about doing the same thing for the governor's race and the Secretary of State race. I won't have time to do that, obviously, before the convention, at least for a full episode, but we may still try to reach out to Ryan Kelly and maybe some others who would be interested and have some of these discussions as well. But especially with the Attorney General position, I feel like, there is a duty that I have as a Michigan licensed attorney. And let me explain that in 2 simple concepts. One is, we as attorneys in Michigan have a duty to protect and inform the public. That's actually written into state law, MCL 600.901. In the compiler's note, it is citing actually a Michigan Supreme Court case from a very fabulous year, 1983, the Falk v. State Bar case. But it's important. We as attorneys have a duty to protect and inform the public, which is what I've been fighting for years, but very much so, and solely for my career for the last 2 years. But also Michigan Rules of Professional Conduct, which I've talked to you guys about before, but Michigan Rules of Professional Conduct 8.2, if you look at that and then you look at the comment to that, there's something I wanted to point out to you. That tells us that assessments by lawyers, so, my opinion as a lawyer, are relied on in evaluating the professional and personal fitness of persons being considered for election or appointment to judicial office and to public legal offices, such as attorney general, prosecuting attorney, and public defender. So essentially, a lawyer's assessment of the candidates is important, and that goes hand in hand with a lawyer's duty to protect and inform the public. So that's why we're sitting here having this important discussion today about the race of attorney general in the state of Michigan, and specifically having that conversation with one of those three AG candidates. So with that being said, man, there's so much to talk about and so little time. So I realize that there's going to be some nuances, or there's going to be a lot of detail that you could offer on some things. So just keep in mind that I do have a ton of specific questions that I kind of wanted to at least touch on. So if you can, just try to keep that in mind when you're answering some questions. But okay, so... Well, let me very quickly. You've been a prosecutor before, is that right?
Yeah. So I see there's a question. Where am I from? I'm from West Bloomfield is where I grew up. I live in Commerce Township. I represent the 39th district, which is all of Commerce Township, Wolverine Lake, Wixom, Northern, and Western West Bloomfield. And kind of with my background, Michigan State, Wayne State. When I was at Michigan State, I did an internship with the state police out of the Brighton Post. I can get into a lot of stories there, but I learned about auxiliary and reserve police services. I ended up going to the Oakland Police Academy, the Reserve Academy, during my first semester of law school. So I did both at the same time, graduated there, with honors, and was a reserve sheriff's deputy throughout law school and afterwards. I'm now currently a reserve police officer. I did a stint as a special prosecutor. So I am the only candidate that has done trials in the courtroom as a prosecutor and a criminal defense attorney, and had my own practice dealing with both criminal law and civil litigation. A lot of general business disputes, representing small businesses as their general counsel, individuals, families, you name it. Anything specialty, I referred out. But I have the only candidate with that broad-based legal experience, licensed for 17 years, both now in the private sector, in the public sector as a second-term state representative.
And just for comparison, I'm not 100% certain on this, but I'm fairly certain to those of you watching. The other two candidates, Tom Leonard, I believe, only has the experience in criminal cases on the prosecution side. And attorney Matt DePerno, I believe, has more of the criminal defense experience and not prosecution. As far as you know, Ryan, is that right?
That's right. With Tom Leonard, and it's my understanding Matt DePerno concentrated on tax law and then civil litigation. At one of the debates, he said he has handled a criminal matter, but I don't know how, far extent that is, whether it's just one case. I mean, that was.
But I think if anything, it's just criminal defense. He doesn't have prosecution.
Yeah, he doesn't have any prosecution. Yeah, so it's one or the other. How extensive those are, nobody's as extensive as my experience.
Okay. So with that being said, this might be a pretty easy question for you, but as quickly as possible, just in an overview kind of format, what would you say are some of the key constitutionally protected rights, either in the U.S. or Michigan constitutions, for criminal matters, for criminal defendants?
Well, the number one issue that, what most people hear about is your right to remain silent. But that actually is not that big of issues and constitutional rights in criminal matters. It's the Fourth Amendment, search and seizure, and your arrest, which is also under the Fourth Amendment, is actually seizing your person. So the Fourth Amendment I think has the vast amount of case law and controversy and opinion surrounding it in the criminal realm. And then you go into, and that's before you even get into the courtroom. The majority of this is actually getting into the courtroom, but that's what, we're maybe we'll talk about the Grand Rapids shooting. That is all analyzed under a Fourth Amendment principles. Once you get into a courtroom, once you are under arrest, once they are searching, then they fill out warrants under the Fourth Amendment to go investigate a suspect who becomes a defendant, then you're looking at, again, Fourth Amendment principles, but then you have your Fifth Amendment rights to not incriminate yourself. We'll go into those of where your phone, where if you have a passcode on your phone, they cannot force you to give your physical passcode, but they can force you to put it at your face to unlock your phone with your face. And those are different principles when analyzed under the Constitution. And you go into your Sixth Amendment rights for counsel and having an attorney present at different stages of the proceedings. So it's really 4, 5, 6.
So would you also say there's that underlying notion of the right to be treated equally, have that equal protection of the law, like we'd see in civil, criminal alike?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And then again, those are going to be other arguments, and depending on whether it's, at a scene or afterwards, equal protection, due process, your 14th Amendment, so it just depends on what the arguments are there, what the facts, the totality of the circumstances.
So, and for those of you watching, he talked about the Sixth Amendment. In Michigan, it's also those rights for specific to criminal defendants are in Article 1, Section 20. It's the right to a speedy and public trial, which doesn't happen in Allegan County. The right to be informed of the nature of the accusation, the right to be confronted with the witnesses against you, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in your behavior. In other words, to force, like if there's some third party, an employee of a gas station or something, who, witnessed something that would help you in your case, but they don't want to cooperate. They don't want to come to court and tell what happened. You can have the court subpoena them, or, an attorney subpoena them to come and testify, even if they don't want to. And of course, the right to assistance of counsel for your defense. So on the punishment side, I'm assuming you would agree that we have, if somebody does have that due process and they are found guilty as a matter of law, then they are protected from excessive, bail would be at the beginning of a case, but excessive fines or cruel and unusual punishments. Never heard an attorney that argued that that wasn't protected in the Constitution. One thing that people often forget about would be, which we're seeing a lot with these executive orders and MDHHS emergency orders, how things were changing and essentially at times being retroactive. That there is a right in the U.S. and Michigan constitutions to be free from a bill of attainder, which is essentially an act which can end up imposing a death sentence without a trial. And we saw that there were some, things in nursing homes and things of that nature, where there's treatments being denied, where physicians were saying, hey, look, hydroxychloroquine would be appropriate here, or some other, treatment. But the AG's office or the governor's office was strong-arming pharmacies and doctors and saying, no, you can't have. In fact, state rep, oh my gosh, I totally lost her name. I can picture what she looks like, from Detroit. A Democrat. What would you say?
I would say, which one? Karen Whitsett?
Yes, Karen Whitsett. That she ended up having some leaders on both the Democrat and Republican side, as state legislators, writing letters basically begging pharmacies and providers to go ahead and give her the treatments that then President Donald Trump was saying would be most helpful. And if it wasn't for her ability to get those, she probably wouldn't be with us today. I believe it was her and her husband that were gravely ill with COVID. So Anyway, and she's a Democrat. She's not a Republican, for those of you watching and wondering about that. It's not a party issue. But anyway, so some of those things are, you know, we need to be aware of what all of our rights are when we're out there enforcing the law, either just as attorneys, part of the judicial system, or police officers, or prosecuting attorneys, or attorney general. So
that's a great point. And kind of the story about like who I am. My father is an attorney. He practiced for a couple of years and then went into business, into real estate, became an investor, commercial properties, and was an entrepreneur back when nobody knew what an entrepreneur was. And I have an older brother, like I said, he told both of us, you're going to law school. That's it. So I had no choice. I knew I was going to law school ever since I was in elementary school. But he said, whatever you want to do in life, I will support you. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? You just said I have to go to law school. He's
like, and you could be a barber or
right, exactly. So that law degree is that base. If you want to go into business, you know all your rights. If somebody threatens to sue you, you know whether it's legitimate or not. You don't have to be on the phone all day with your attorney. Can I do this? Can I do that? If you want to go into politics, right? You have to know the law to be able to make the law and change the law. I've always been interested in law enforcement. You have to know the law to enforce the law. Again, it gives you that level of empowerment where, you know, somebody threatens, oh, you did this. No, I did it properly. And working on both sides of the law, like I have, wearing the different hats as a police officer and a defense attorney, being a defense attorney makes you a better police officer to follow the rules and know what's going on to enforce the law better. And being a police officer on the front lines there, you know, it makes you a better defense attorney with all the same trainings and everything to make sure that the prosecutor and the police officers followed the law and did their job. It's not incompatible. A lot of people say, how can you do one and the other? Because I'm all about justice, seeking justice and the right thing.
Yeah. Well, and so kind of on that point and what the duties of a prosecutor are, today's true or false question, I do that every Tuesday. We have a Tuesday true or false, well, Ryan, you could tell us, is it true or is it false? A prosecutor has the responsibility of a minister of justice and not simply that of an advocate. The responsibility carries with it specific obligations to ensure a defendant is accorded procedural justice and that guilt is only decided upon the basis of sufficient evidence. Is that, and let me...
That's true in my eyes. It's true in how it's supposed to be.
Okay, so the answers being asked or proposed would be true, regardless of whether a defendant has his or her own attorney. The prosecutor has a duty to ensure the defendant is accorded procedural justice, or false, a prosecutor owes no duty to the defendant, as it is just the defense attorney who is supposed to protect the defendant's interests. And you're saying the answer is true, regardless if they have an attorney, it's the prosecutor's job?
Yes.
Yeah. So for those of you watching at home or on your lunch break, Michigan Rule of Professional Conduct for attorneys 3.8. If you look at the comment, I literally pulled that word for word for the question there. And it's important because that entire rule, you guys should look at that. That entire rule is specifically talking about the special duties of the prosecuting attorneys. Also, you know, you mentioned police. In fact, there's one thing that you mentioned that I absolutely loved, and it seems common sense, but man, do people not follow it? And that is that the police, if you're going to enforce the law, if you're going to be a law enforcement officer, that you have to know what the law is in order to enforce it. And yeah, that's common sense. A lot of police, sheriff's deputies, whatever, a lot of law enforcement officers throughout my career, because I have served as a public defender in 2 different states, as a lawyer guardian ad litem. I've obviously been in the freedom fight. I've been in the, hallway of the state legislature when Chatfield decided to lock us out on April 30th from that session of legislature, etc. And so speaking and being face to face with a lot of law enforcement officers, the one most common response I hear is, well, I'm not an attorney. You can argue that in court. And it's kind of hard to think of, I mean, okay, great. You think you want to stay in your own lane, but if you're the law enforcement officer, you have to know what the law is in order to enforce it. But more specifically, as it applies to the AG race or any prosecutor, I found it interesting that Michigan Rule of Professional Conduct 5.3, it talks about a lawyer's responsibility for non-lawyer assistance. And, the people that work for you as an investigator or as clerical staff or something of that nature. But then the comment to that rule specifically deals with I want to make sure I get the right one here. The comment is specifically applying that in a prosecutor situation. So that says, as does Rule 3.8, which we talked about a minute ago, this rule may, in certain situations, impose on a prosecutor an obligation to make reasonable efforts to ensure that a defendant's rights are protected. In other words, the prosecutor has to actively take steps to protect a defendant's rights. Of course, not all of the individuals who might encroach upon those rights are under the control of the prosecutor, but where this rule applies, the prosecutor must take reasonable and appropriate steps to ensure that the defendant's rights are protected. And quite honestly, even though you have a lot of prosecutors that intend to do well, or they're nice people, or they're really intelligent, unfortunately, I have very rarely seen any prosecuting attorney actually follow through on this and take proactive steps to ensure that a defendant's rights are being protected. They might just make sure that they're not intentionally violating the rights of the defendant, but they're not taking that proactive step. So anyway, I think that's a very important concept that we shouldn't gloss over. But you mentioned the governor's executive orders, our conversations about that, and the concept of the separation of powers, how the governor was putting these orders into place, and that she's one person, that there's the legislature that does other things. Of course, the Michigan Supreme Court didn't touch the issue of whether the legislature would be allowed to issue rules or laws to do some of those very things that she was doing through executive order. But they simply said that her executive orders violated one state law when they went past April 30th, and the other law she was relying on was unconstitutional. Again, they ignored the argument as all the arguments as to why it was unconstitutional, but they merely stated, well, it is unconstitutional because it separates because of the separation of powers. In the back and forth, the later motions filed by the governor and statements that were made by then acting director Robert Gordon of MDHHS, as well as Governor Whitmer herself, especially throughout that weekend, in talking about using the public health code, and that the Supreme Court was doing the public a huge disservice, et cetera, et cetera. Let me first ask you, what is your, now that they've been using the public health code, MCL 333.2253, and then in local situations, MCL 333.2453, and you have that iron pig case that's bouncing between the Court of Appeals and the Michigan Supreme Court, where the Michigan Attorney General's office is arguing that the Supreme Court got it wrong the first time, and that the executive branch does have the ability to issue these orders. We already heard your stance on the separation of powers issue. First, let me ask you, it's talked about in the opinion from October 2nd, 2020. There's a lot of discussion on the separation of powers doctrine. Is it a doctrine in Michigan?
Well, I think it's clear. I don't know if, I guess, the definition of doctrine, but it's clear in our Constitution. It's actually spelled out pretty clearly. So I think typically when you say doctrine, I guess it depends on in that meeting. A lot of the doctrines are what the court comes up with, where maybe it's some type of judicial activism or ways to interpret certain language, and they call it a doctrine because of what a court came up with. That's what, like, that doctrine.
Versus the actual language of the Constitution.
Right. The language, it's literally in the language, and the language is clear.
Okay. And it wasn't, I guess maybe it could be a trick question, but that's exactly what I was getting at, is that the court referred to it as a doctrine. They talk about cases from the U.S. Supreme Court where there's the doctrine of the separation of church and state. That's another doctrine, where it's the separation of powers. But what they failed to recognize was the plain language of the Michigan State Constitution. It's no doctrine. It's literally the words separation of powers are written into Article 3, Section 2 of the state constitution. But so what is your stance then on whether it's through the public health code, whether it's through the remaining executive order statute, which would be the 1976 Emergency Management Act. Either of those, they're both giving the power of the executive branch to issue orders to regulate people. I mean,
I think what you're getting at is whether, again, they are saying it was an unconstitutional delegation of powers. And that's what we see with our federal government, how Congress gives these agencies, gives up their ability to regulate and gives it to bureaucrats like the ATF and things like that. And that's how the federal government has run amok. But I think your underlying question is, again, it's how the Supreme Court rules, where they ruled on that delegation, and whether, I think what you're getting at is that the legislature has the authority to pass laws like that themselves. Because I think those laws and those rules in themselves, not whether she had the power to do it, was ruled unconstitutional, but whether those orders themselves would then be unconstitutional against our Constitution.
So basically, to maybe clear up the question. So back then on April 30th, the House and Senate actually passed Senate Bill 858, which codified, I want to say 32, it was over half of the governor's then existing executive orders. So it literally just took her orders, 32 of them, and made them law. And they put it on her desk for her to sign it. And she didn't. And she said it was unconstitutional for a variety of reasons. Ironically, I'll get to that in a minute. But so one of the things I'm wondering is if she had signed that into law, or if there had been a supermajority that overrode her veto, is a bill like Senate Bill 858, where it's the legislature putting into law, a mask mandate or a social distancing mandate, or
I'll just stop you there. It's unconstitutional. So that's against our First Amendment rights of free expression, free speech.
Okay.
So any law that is passed that doesn't pass constitutional muster, in my opinion, it's void. Okay. It has no force.
So let me ask you this, because I asked, I didn't ask. Matt DePerno and I had this discussion back in November, December 2020, when he was working on the Antrim County audit case for the elections. And he had reached out to me and wanted to brainstorm some ways to handle things. He said that the judge in the case was ordering him to release the information from the audit to the Michigan Attorney General's office and the Secretary of State's office, who were not parties to the case, but also at the same time was prohibiting him from releasing that same information to the public under a gag order. And I said to him, well, hey, I mean, that's obviously unconstitutional. They can't order you to release information to non-parties like that in this context. And they certainly can't put the gag order on you and stop you from releasing that information to the public. And he said to me, well, yeah, but you have to follow. This was a circuit court judge who did this, and you have to follow a circuit court judge's order until a higher court of appeals or Supreme Court explains or declares that decision to be unconstitutional. What are your thoughts about that kind of concept? Or a judge orders you to do something, follow some statutes that are bad or whatever, and you know that they're unconstitutional, what is anyone's duty in terms of following that court order until the higher court declares that action unconstitutional?
I mean, I think it depends on the circumstances surrounding it, but unfortunately, he might have had the right, I guess, angle with it. And again, I don't know the whole facts or what the order said there. That's why if a judge orders something, depending on the timing, you file a motion, you do an immediate appeal, you go to a different judge, because judges do have a lot of authority. And I've seen it where they abuse that discretion. I'm sure you've seen it where these judges, they call it black robe syndrome, and they get that robe on. And especially at the district court level, which is the most amount of people that see the district court. District courts is where every single criminal case begins, but all misdemeanor cases, lower level traffic infractions are done all the way through. Any serious cases start in the district court and then they go to the circuit court. And any type of civil case up to $25,000 threshold, small claims, anything up to 25, landlord tenant disputes, that's all at the district court level. And at the district court, they know that the litigants there, typically the vast bulk of them don't have the money or the resources to appeal those judges' orders. They'll sit there and they'll know they got the law wrong, or they'll do it and say, oh, if you don't like it, appeal me. And know how our legal system is broken in a lot of regards and how long it can be in a delay. And that's why these cases, even on a fast track, take so long to go through the system and finally get years later through the Court of Appeals or to the Supreme Court. So, I've worked actually, and we say some of this about going after judges, these rogue, if you will, but there's no mechanism right now. The Supreme Court Administrative Office that oversees the judicial branch and management, I try to get the reversal rates for a certain judge who I keep getting complaints about in Oakland County, and they don't even track that. They should be tracking these things, because if a judge is constantly getting reversed or they're having a bad attitude on the bench, the Judicial Tenure Commission, it takes so long. It took this Judge Brennan in Livingston County. I just gave a talk. Somebody was asking about my experiences. And I said, one of the worst experiences I had was in front of Judge Brennan in Livingston County. And she ordered me, actually at one point, I was sitting there with a client who was accused of a crime. And she was asking him questions during this pretrial, trying to, apparently there was an allegation, there was contact between the defendant and a witness. And I tell him, don't answer the question. It's improper. He has his Fifth Amendment rights. She told me to shut up, not to counsel my client. And at one point said, leave my courtroom or I'm going to have you arrested. What do you do in that situation? You know it's illegal what she's doing.
I sure as hell wouldn't leave. In fact, I'll tell you what, that same thing essentially happened to me in my Allegan County case, which is still ongoing, trial set for June 15th, 2022, sixth trial date that the judge has given us. No reason for changing the dates. But anyway, when I walked in February of 2020, 2021, excuse me, I had already made a ADA request to have it in person with no masks, because I'm hard of hearing and I read lips, which is why when you're talking, I'm staring at your screen and seeing what you're saying instead of just keeping my eye on the camera. Anyway, I had seen, though, that some judges were wearing masks and some were not. But anyway, it seemed that my order, my request was approved by the judge. And yet when I got there, he's wearing a mask and the prosecuting attorney is wearing a mask. And we also have a right to have the public be present in all of our hearings. And there's a state law that says all hearings are open to the public, let alone that due process issue. And I walked in the courtroom and they said no one else was allowed in with me. They wouldn't let my husband in. They wouldn't let my father in. They wouldn't let the press in. They wouldn't let anybody in, which is illegal and unconstitutional. I came in, though, the deputies let Attorney Greg Todd come in with me and as my assistants of counsel. And he came in before we even approached the table, before we were even on the record. The judge is questioning him about who he is, telling him he has to leave, even after he's identifying himself as an attorney who is there to provide assistance of counsel to me, who had been brought up to speed on my motion to dismiss. The judge ordered him out of the courtroom. He wasn't even allowed to continue bringing my stuff up to the front table. That was, I mean, I'm not mad at him, because it was like, he was so dumbfounded. He said afterwards, I never would have believed you if you would have told me about this afterwards, what happened. But he was so blown away, and it was so ridiculous what happened. So many laws and constitutional provisions that were broken all in one foul swoop by this judge, with the prosecuting attorney sitting there and allowing it to happen, even though, as we talked about earlier, they have that special duty to make sure that my rights are procedurally are kept intact throughout this whole process. He ended up leaving the courtroom and didn't put up much of a fight, probably because in that instinct he was thinking, I don't want to harm her interests by making the fight bigger than it needs to be. But quite frankly, in hindsight, had I been the attorney, I sure as hell wouldn't have left. And if the judge would have said, you're going to be in contempt of court, I would have said, for what? Representing my client? Though I was arrested because I was representing two clients that were there circulating a petition violating no law, no constitutional provision whatsoever. So, and they knew that. I mean, there's no denying that. They don't argue that they knew I was coming just to be an attorney for those individuals. So I guess you could say, I've already taken the stance that as an attorney, you do what you need to do. In fact, I don't remember the specific court rules and whatnot off the top of my head right now, but there's several that I'll talk about. As an attorney, we have that duty to protect and inform the public, but we also have a duty to be a part of that justice system. And when there is some sort of legal obligation that would otherwise be imposed, that we have a genuine argument for saying that it's not constitutional or it's not legal, we don't have the obligation to continue following that law or that rule. And of course, courts never talk about that, but it actually says it in there, because if we were told we had to continue following unconstitutional laws, for example, and just wait for the court to sort it out, there'd be no point. You just...
I mean, that's throughout this thing. And even as a representative, I would tell businesses, no, what she's doing, what Whitmer is doing, it's unconstitutional. Go about your business. You have issues. If they stop you, I'll take care of it. I will help you. I'm in your corner. I'll do whatever my office can do. And even, as a private attorney, I have friends that will help and will defend you over these unconstitutional mandates and orders. So in fact, some of her original mandates, knowing that she can't control a co-equal branch, said these orders don't apply to, the legislature. So I deputized a lot of people. You're my assistant state representative. Go out and do stuff in the community under my orders, and wrote letters saying you're going to do this and get research for me on what's going on out there and blah, 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 having that extra level of protection for people to go about their business.
Right. Well, and so I guess whether it's the legislature that makes a bad law that's unconstitutional, or a governor who exceeds her authority and makes executive orders that violate the Constitution, or a judge who makes an order that is clearly illegal or unconstitutional, my argument has always been, we don't have the obligation to follow that. Now, if it's a court decision and, there's something there, we might have to, we might have the obligation to simultaneously fight it in court and, file appeals or follow whatever, process there would be to fighting it that way. But we absolutely don't have to, as Marbury versus Madison told
Right.
us,
I mean,
any unconstitutional act of the government, it can't create an office, it can't create an obligation, it can't create a duty on behalf of someone. So it's void right from the very beginning.
well, and it also depends on who it is, who's the order directing, because I've counseled the legislature. We're a co-equal branch. We can have the Supreme Court or, a court say one thing. We can totally disregard it if we want to. We're equal. It's just
So,
like in a business, right? Or even in as a thing. They're not our sergeant. They're at the same level at the patrol level. They're not the captain. They don't tell you what to do.
right.
You can ultimately ignore it, and that's what our political process is for. That's even getting into some other matters, but yeah, I'm not going to go off on a tangent there, but it's one of these principles of the separation of powers for a reason. And that's why at the end of the day, the one thing that is that the legislature has is the power of the purse strings, the power of the money. And if you don't like what another branch is doing, you withhold those funds. And that's what I said is like, why are you giving the entire budget, giving Whitmer everything she wants when we're in battles with her? Give her nothing and let her try to enforce her unconstitutional orders with no money. Give her nothing. And they wouldn't do it. I had to vote against the budget. Even again, I said, listen, anybody with a child, you don't give your kid an allowance of their yearly, all year up front and say, behave, do your chores. And I'm going to,
especially when they have a track record of not behaving.
Exactly. That's what you have is, all right. I said, let's do monthly budgets. You want me to vote for a budget? I'll do a monthly budget to keep her in line. Talking about vaccine mandates. We said, putting it in the budget to say you can't have these at our universities. You can't have them anywhere, these health departments. And I said, all right, monthly budgets, make sure this stuff gets implemented. The House initially passed quarterly budgets. All right, cool. That's a thing in the step in the right direction. The Senate took it out. It was passed without those provisions. I voted no, one of only a handful of reps that voted no. Steve Johnson, Steve Carr, Riley.
And this is a Republican-controlled legislature, ladies and gentlemen.
Republican-controlled legislature. I'm one of only a handful of representatives standing up to when they're putting more fees, extending sunsets, doing things that against the people, against the constituents, against their, frankly, a lot of the principles that they ran in their primaries and ran on, and they're doing the opposite.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons I'm one of 55 Republican members. That's why I'm running for Attorney General, to be the one to use the power for the people to ensure our civil rights and liberties are upheld and to do the right thing, regardless of party. But they ended up passing that budget, and guess what Whitmer did? Said, oh, you guys in the health departments ignore those provisions, that boilerplate. I believe it's unconstitutional. Ignore it. And a lot of them did. And then the leaders, oh, how can she do this? She stabbed us in the back. We can't trust her. I'm like, hello, told you so.
Yeah.
Like, are you kidding me?
Well, so let me ask you on the issue of these orders. Most likely, the Iron Pig case is going to be still in court, whether it's the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court of Michigan, where they're battling out MCL 333.2253 and whether the MDHHS can issue these EOs that the governor's EOs were originally doing. So if that case is still going and you win the AG spot, what would you do about this case? It's the AG's office that's
I would withdraw the case. I would withdraw the case. The circuit judge got it totally right, especially according to the Supreme Court opinion. I downloaded the opinion. I think I got a few pages in and then got distracted. I had to go to something else. It could still be on my computer and one of the hundreds of tabs in the background. But no, absolutely. I think the law in the case is settled. It's clear, and it vindicated my position all along what the Supreme Court ruled on the Governor Whitmer's orders, and that's the exact thing that these orders are based upon. It's pretty clear cut. Again, day one. It's saying a lot of the times this question, what are you going to do? What are your priorities? And, one of those priorities isn't, a specific case. It isn't a specific thing at all. It's a general theme of We have somebody in the Attorney General's office that has been misusing, weaponizing, and using it for policy, for her far left extreme policy. And we need to correct that course. We need to get a new captain on the ship to right the path. And there's something like 40,000 cases against the state. You're not just the top law enforcement officer, the top prosecutor. You're the attorney for all the state departments and representing them in lawsuits. What cases are going on in this state that, don't have the publicity, that is being unjust? Somebody's treated unfairly. If they're still going after Carl the barber's license or Marlena's, business, whatever it is, we need to look at the whole picture, what's going on, and saying, no, this is unfair, remove this. This is a political prosecution, remove this. Getting up to date on these things. I already know line 5, she kept losing in court on the construction of the new line 5, and she's continuing going after trying to shut down our current line 5. She ran on this. This is policy. This is not what the Attorney General is supposed to be doing, is creating policy. That's up to the legislature. I will remove that from day one, withdraw from that case. Looking at some of these other cases, her amicus briefs on all types of issues around the country, looking, hey, is this going to benefit Michiganders? Does this benefit everybody? Or is this position just benefiting her and her political cronies? That's what I'm going to do. And you want somebody with integrity and know what he's doing to look at all those cases. And I'm not going to be a shill, and anybody can tell you, for the Republican side. You're not just going to get some Republican. I think the prosecutors, sheriffs, even the Attorney General really should be nonpartisan when you're enforcing the law. There's certain things you can do with discretion and shifting budgets and having, shifting resources to target, whether it's violent crimes, human trafficking, consumer protection. I said I would have an election integrity unit on day one and have a couple assistant attorney generals and investigators housed within that unit to make sure, not just afterwards, but leading up to an election and on election day, people are following the law. That's what I did as a poll challenger and election day attorney for the Republican Party. But it doesn't have to be just, a Republican or a Democrat thing. We need to be following the laws in our elections.
So about the laws, now elections is an important topic, but recently Governor Whitmer filed a case in Oakland Circuit Court asking the court to declare that women have the right to an abortion under the Michigan Constitution, and asking the court to enjoin or stop the 13 prosecutors that have abortion clinics in their counties from prosecuting cases under MCL 750.14, which is the criminal abortion statute. Mm-hmm. So obviously, her argument is that even though there's this debate right now and has been for quite some time in the U.S. Supreme Court about whether a woman has the right to an abortion under the U.S. Constitution, Whitmer is arguing that it is an unequivocal fact that the Michigan Constitution contains a right to abortion for women.
I know you're very adept, and you've read the Constitution probably more times than I have, even though I give them out in my office and carry it in my car. But I don't remember reading that in our Michigan Constitution. Is that somewhere in there?
The word abortion is not.
No. I do recall in there either.
The word life is actually in there a few times. In fact, you touched on it earlier. Due process. We will not be deprived life, liberty, or property without due process of law, guaranteed in both constitutions. But that first one, life. And so, they're trying to say, well, it's, I don't even know how her brief, her complaint doesn't even talk about life. It's just saying whether a child is viable in the womb or not. And that's all that really matters. Her argument is that the whole anti-abortion statute is in violation of the Equal Protection Clause because it was enacted to keep women in their domestic servitude roles. And so therefore it's unconstitutional, et cetera. But I don't know what your thoughts are. My thoughts are, the Constitution's pretty darn clear. We have a right to life, and it doesn't say only when you can breathe on your own. I mean, if we say it's only when you can breathe on your own, or when your organs function entirely sufficiently on their own and don't need any assistance whatsoever, then what does that mean for people who are in the hospital? What does it mean for all the COVID patients that were on ventilators? What does it mean for, the millions of people who receive medical care every single year? What does it mean for the Kevorkian case with assisted suicide? Is it okay to say that your life is only counted as a life if you can physically survive on your own without the assistance of anyone else? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you have, I think, two different, like anything in these legal cases, different issues of how to rule, what your positions are. And I think there's, as a state representative, right, you have the Constitution, you can have statutes as long as they're not against the Constitution. We also don't like judicial activism, reading in things, but we have a set of case law precedent. And that's what this whole Roe v. Wade, this new case Hobbs, that is whether that's going to overturn that. I think for me, it's, again, wearing two different hats. I have two different viewpoints on this. As an attorney general, a potential attorney general candidate, being the attorney for the state versus a state representative or as an individual setting policy. Looking at it from that lens, from the attorney general, not Governor Whitmer's position, but Dana Nessel's position, she came out and said, I'm not going to defend this law. That's literally her job, whether she likes the law or not. As an attorney, how many times, and I don't know, you said with your extensive career as what's it called? What is it? Pro bono?
Public defender?
Public defender. Thank you. I was just, the words were escaping me for some reason. Public defender. As a public defender, right? You're there to ensure, just so it was our talk, that the prosecutor and the police officer are doing their job. You could defend somebody that is repugnant. You don't like them. You don't like what they did. And you frankly wouldn't defend those actions, but you're there to ensure that the prosecutor did their job properly. The police officer did their job properly. They didn't skirt the law. They didn't go around the law. They did everything by the book. So that defendant's rights were not violated. Maybe they were found guilty. Maybe they weren't. You had reasonable cause. You have a duty to zealously advocate for your client, whether you agree with what they did or with them or not. If she is the attorney for the state, she's saying she doesn't want to do that job because she disagrees with that law. That's not your role. Your role is to defend that law or put somebody else in your office if you can't do it morally, ethically, whatever, to do it. But the attorney general is the attorney. And it's up to the client, the state, right? Whether it's the legislative branch, just the people in general, to defend those laws and do your job. So I think I have a real problem with her saying she's not going to defend that law.
So what's more than that is it's her office. So there's three attorneys' offices essentially that are listed, with multiple attorneys listed at each address. But there's a so-called special prosecutor listed from New York, New York. There's a so-called special prosecutor that Whitmer listed in filing this case as from Washington, D.C. And then she also listed the Attorney General's office with a few different individuals in various roles within the Attorney General's office. So it is the Attorney General's office that is bringing this case. So regardless of what the law says, the law could say that a doctor would be put in prison if they denied a woman a right to an abortion. That could be a law. What I guess my thoughts on it are, the Constitution is pretty clear that we have the right to life, and there's no due process being afforded to the unborn children nor to the fathers of these unborn children. So they're not given a lawyer guardian ad litem, which I've also served in that role for many years.
That's a great point. That's a great point that a lot of people don't bring up.
So how is it that, as far as policy goes, whether, somebody agrees with it or not, the facts are the facts. We don't have to agree with facts. I mean, people say there's a separation of church and state, and so you can't talk about God and government. God is the foundation of our government. It's for the
it's freedom of religion, not freedom from religion.
Even more.
Yeah,
even more than that, our state constitution, the preamble, we're grateful to Almighty God for the blessings of freedom and earnestly desiring to secure those blessings undiminished to ourselves and our posterity. So we create state government.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's their sole purpose.
Yeah. My great aunt is actually a nun, and she went back to school. She worked, she's an attorney, worked for Lakeshore Legal Aid for years, and one of my role models. And we've had many discussions on that going through law school and afterwards about the role of religion and government and the separation of church and state, and what does that mean? And again, and that's where that concept, and it was always saying it's freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. And that's the problem with our society right now, is that taking God out of everything and using the media, using the propaganda and indoctrination in our schools, and having these policies put in place that don't have respect for the nuclear household and the underpinnings of, what really America was founded upon.
So what would you do then if you win this race? Her case, it's going to be still going because it's in the circuit court now. Whoever loses is going to the Court of Appeals. Whoever loses is going to the Michigan Supreme Court. Obviously, somebody is going to file a request to bypass the Court of Appeals and try to jump to the Michigan Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court's going to say, no, we don't think that's appropriate. It's going to be a whole big thing like we've seen for the last 2 years, nothing but that. So it will be going on by the time the new Attorney General takes office. If that person is you, what would you do with this case?
Well, I think one is I'd be defending this case. I'll be vigorously defending it, and not just based off of my personal opinions, but that's what the job of Attorney General is to defend the laws. Especially,
what do you mean? It's the Attorney General's office that's the plaintiff in the case. They're representing
the defendants. The Attorney General is the defendant in one of those cases. That's why she was named as the top law enforcement officer. And that's
no. In this case, it's her office that's listed as the attorney for Whitmer. And there's 13 prosecuting attorneys.
Then that's the other one, the Planned Parenthood, or the other. There's two cases going on.
I only know about the one.
Okay, so there's two cases, and one of them is the Attorney General is the defendant because she's the top prosecutor and the attorney for the state.
Okay,
so I didn't see. And again, I haven't read the briefs on Whitmer's side, but that's the side I am is on the current law. What it all depends, and I think it's premature to navigate this field, and that's one of the arguments. I think somebody was saying that they were going to file with this case I haven't read the briefs of what I heard saying because of it was pointed to what's going to happen, at the federal level. I think it's moot, whatever, not yet ripe, I guess I should say, but I would have to see how the Supreme Court rules to analyze of how the case progresses forward. But here in Michigan, no, I don't see that law is against unconstitutional in Michigan.
Okay, so I guess let me put it this way: as an amicus, I plan to submit a brief or whatever it might need to be, depending on the stage at the time that I file this argument, but that not only to deny the governor's requests, but to, on the flip side, outright declare that the words of the Constitution stand regardless of whether somebody likes them or not, and that we each have a right to life that includes those unborn children. And so all abortion in the state of Michigan, even if we're just looking at the Michigan State Constitution, all abortions are unconstitutional and don't provide the due process necessary for fathers, for the unborn children. So it's not just a matter of enforcing the criminal abortion statute, because there's a lot of things cut out of that, but rather a more aggressive and straightforward approach to say, okay, but we need to halt the abortions that are taking place in these 13 counties completely. What
So,
would be your position
yeah,
on?
I mean, again, depending on, you know, the makeup, unfortunately, we're getting backlash in the legislature of going to the Supreme Court. What I want to bring up a great point is that we are now, our Supreme Court in Michigan after the last elections is now in Democrat control.
Yep.
No matter how much you say that it's nonpartisan, that's a lot of the leanings, and that, this is a whole longer conversation. But that's why it's imperative, if believing on this side of the aisle, that we have elections coming up in November for Supreme Court justice. We have Brian Zara, the most conservative member of the bench, who's up for re-election. We have these nominating conventions this week, and it seems we have Paul Hudson, who's an attorney, an appellate attorney on the West Side, and he's going to be the other Republican nominee. Now, on the Democrat side, it's Richard Bernstein, who I'm sure everybody is familiar with, and an individual they just nominated last week, Representative Kyra Bolden. And I want to tell you a couple stories of Kyra Bolden. This is how important these elections are, because it affects you. You have a legal analysis like we're talking about. We have an illegal analysis. You have what the law, the Constitution says, what the law says. Maybe it's not up to my opinion. Maybe it's not up to Catherine's opinion. It's ultimately up to a judge's opinion. And if that judge gets it wrong, you appeal that judge. Ultimately, and when you're talking about Michigan law, the buck stops at the Michigan Supreme Court. What is the Michigan Supreme Court? What are they made up of? Politics always has as a play, partisanship. So we have elections this year where this case is not going to be decided before the elections this year. Like we said, it's going to be ongoing and after these elections. So we need to make sure, with this momentum on our side, everybody is fully informed, because one of those things, and that Catherine brought up in the beginning, is has a duty to, and it's not just people go to your attorney friends. Hey, who should I vote for judge? I don't know who these attorneys are, prosecutor. Most of you guys, anybody who's an attorney, is a resource for that. Not only are you a resource, but as Catherine said, you have a duty under the professional rules, or an obligation to vet these people and give your opinion. It's not just the top of the ticket, whether however long the thing is. Flip it to the back, go to these nonpartisan, look into these people, because these are the people sitting on the bench that are deciding your rights, that are deciding what the Constitution says. And we don't want more activist, super liberal, far left Democrats sitting on the bench that will oppose or rule against your beliefs and what your vision, what the law, the Constitution in America is all about. Rep Bolden, who's going to be on the ballot, she sits on the Judiciary Committee with me. She's from Southfield. She's the representative where, when we were talking about election and voter ID, and it was against it. And I said, and I went up to her afterwards, and after this conversation, I'm like, Rep Bolden, it's like, I'm not trying to pick a fight or anything. I just want to know, how can you be against showing an ID? I just don't understand in my mind. It just, for me, it's so common sense. And, 70-something% of people polled out there. And she said to me, well, not everybody can afford an ID. Okay. All right. I looked it up, $10 to get a state ID. If you can't afford a state ID, then you can show that you're on government assistance, some type, you're homeless, whatever documentation, you can get a free ID. So I did a bill to just make the IDs free. I looked up how much money we take in as Secretary of State. It was like maybe $700 and something thousand million, whatever it was. It was negligible when you're talking about a $74 billion budget. I said, there's nothing I can think of more essential for the government to do than to provide an ID to show someone is who they say they are. Just like my major legislation, I'm one of the most bipartisan representatives in the legislature. I get Republicans and Democrats co-sponsoring all my major legislation without compromising principles. I'm still the 6th rated most conservative member of the Michigan legislature, both the House and the Senate. I'm able to do that by focusing on issues that matter most to everybody. Again, free IDs. I got Rep. Jim Ellison, Democrat from Royal Oak area. Before I submitted the bill, I said, hey, Jim, how do you feel about this? Free IDs. He said, oh, I love it. Great. He co-signed it, got my bipartisanship, especially when you're in divided government, and working across the aisle, submitted the bill. And it was ended up being brought up a few weeks later with the, hey, show your ID to get your absentee ballot in to vote. All of a sudden, Rep. Ellison didn't like it anymore. Every single Democrat voted against it, including my co-sponsor. It went to the governor's desk. She vetoed it. Now it's part of that's the whole thing of secure my vote petition process, which just like we went through with the governor's Emergency Powers Act, Unlock Michigan, to get around the governor's veto to secure our elections. Kyra Bolden's the same one. So she was against that, voted against it. In judiciary, we had a bill by Senator Runstead, I believe, to make it a felony if you fill out an absentee voter application for somebody else or use somebody else's name, an identity theft type thing, and voter fraud. And she said, and said, we shouldn't be over criminalizing this and making it harsher penalties because it's not an issue now, so there's no reason to do it. And the chair, Graham Filler, kind of was cutting off debate, wouldn't let me speak. And I was just going to point out her blatant hypocrisy when her own clerk, the Southfield clerk, was under indictment at the time and has criminal charges of messing with the absentee ballots. It's a joke. This individual who voted against that, voted against the IDs, who is not just on this issue, and I've had talker on the abortion issue, I think it's beyond pro-choice. I almost like pro-abortion. And then got on the House floor and told a story about how she lost her baby, unfortunately, and what a terrible situation it was. And it's just like hearing that, it's like, and going on about this miracle of life and that she didn't get to experience it, something like that. And it's like, she's the same one that's railing for abortion rights for women. But this is Kyra Bolden, who's now going to be on your ballot, anybody in Michigan, going for Michigan Supreme Court.
And I think you make an important point there that, number one, we need to be watching out who we're voting or not voting for on the ballot. And that includes all offices, especially the state Supreme Court. Quite frankly, every judgeship that's on the ballot. But, when the results come out, if you end up with a state Supreme Court that is, very heavily liberally stacked and people that don't know how to read the Constitution and are bent on interpreting it according to their own personal philosophies, then, there is a danger to bringing an issue in front of them, not because you have to follow unconstitutional laws, but because, as we've seen time and time again, the public en masse will generally follow those unconstitutional laws or orders or case precedent because they think they have to, or because they think they're just protected now. Government's gonna, keep me safe because they agree with my position. So there is a danger to that. I guess my concern is that, and again, I didn't know about the other case where it's the AG's office on the defense there. But when it comes to this case, it's going to be decided one way or the other. So Whitmer is taking the position that, these are unconstitutional because a woman has the right to abort a child in utero. So to me, I don't know. I just, for food for thought to give you something to think about in the time between now and possibly, swearing in as the new Attorney General of the state of Michigan. There is no other way to combat that, the whole argument, other than to say, but an unborn child does have the right to life, liberty, and property that cannot be deprived without due process of law. And abortions outside of an extreme medical situation for the mother, et cetera, whatever criterion would need to be there. Basically, if there's no medically necessary reason for an abortion, that they can't happen. That's really the only, I mean, the stance has to be taken. Otherwise, you do have that worry that, you know, the court is going to end up making a bad decision, but we still, even if we know there's a bad judge involved, we still have to bring forth the best effort to zealously advocate.
Absolutely. And that's was my point earlier, is even if you're going to lose a fight, you have to fight, and you have to fight for it, and you have to fight for your principles. And, right. You know, in this case in particular, that's the whole thing of it. There's no, under the current framework of Roe v. Wade, that law has not been enforceable. Okay. And that's why this lawsuit of Whitmer's, I think, will get thrown out ultimately before the new case is decided, because it's not ripe yet. It's you have to have an actual case or controversy getting into court, and she's seeking a declaratory opinion of such. And I think without that Supreme Court ruling,
actually, the Michigan Court of Appeals has ruled on this. The Supreme Court declined to rule on this, but the standing law, so to speak, is from the Michigan Court of Appeals, saying there is no right to an abortion under the Michigan Constitution. And they did some weird nuancing or carving out of the criminal abortion statute to say that it is still constitutional, even under the Roe v. Wade analysis. Right. So that's what her argument is that, you know, it's they're not following what that supposed standard is supposed to be. So anyway,
so in that case, if there's that case law out there, if the Court of Appeals already ruled that, again, it's still not ripe because the federal courts, the federal Supreme Court hasn't ruled to change that. So then that Court of Appeals opinion would come into play.
Well, and that's the thing. The argument says it's nothing to do with the U.S. Constitution, regardless of what they do at the U.S. level. She's claiming there is a right to an abortion in the Michigan Constitution.
So she's just basically trying to relitigate this previous Court of Appeals opinion. Like right. I haven't read the briefs. It was my understanding based off of some of the reports. I haven't had time to look at the briefs, but.
Yeah, she's asking the court to, she's acting as though they're in the role of the Michigan Supreme Court, but essentially saying the Court of Appeals got it wrong and the Michigan Supreme Court didn't take this issue up. So now there's this unrest and confusion. You have this decision out there by the Court of Appeals. You have the statute that's at least to some degree still in effect. And we can't have that that uncertainty. In fact, what I find interesting is that in her arguments, she even brings up things like, you know, we have these unenumerated rights guaranteed to us in Article 1, Section 23 of the state constitution and the 9th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And so it's not enumerated that a woman has a right to an abortion, but she does nonetheless under this unenumerated rights clause of the Constitution. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, woman, that you literally, I'm going to copy and paste your arguments from this brief, and I'm going to put them in my amicus brief on the Iron Pig case, because that is exactly why you don't get to make EOs that take away our rights.
I love when that happens, when they take those stances and you literally can be like, oh my God, this fits right over here. Talk about, you know, hypocritical, you know how that happens all the time. You know, there is something I want to bring up too, when you're talking about equal protection, when you're talking about Constitution, when you're talking about dealing with federalism in other states, something that nobody else has really talked about. And it's this, we just have this independent, and that's that whole other thing, independent redistricting commission. And I can go on and on about that, but it's based off of the census. We have reapportionment. So we used to have a decade ago, 16 congressional districts, 16 congressmen that represented Michigan based off of population that went to Washington, D.C. to represent our interests. Because of declining population and population elsewhere, and unfortunately, when we have great people move down to Florida, we lose some people. But we are now going down from 14. We're losing another congressional district. We're down to 13. talk about our southern border crisis, talking about other states and the Biden administration letting people just come in. And where are those people going? And all of them for years and years flowing into California. And they have the most amount of say in the most electoral votes based off of these congressional districts, based off of population. Anybody in Michigan, and these Michigan Democrats, I'm in the 11th district, which is Rep. Haley Stevens. Because of the new district, still in the 11th, we have two congressional candidates, Haley Stevens and Andy Levin, now fighting each other in a primary to see who's going to represent. Nobody's asked their opinion, but as the Attorney General, I am going to file lawsuits against California, against the Biden administration, against these other states with these immigration policies based off of our collective unequal enforcement of their laws, our due process, where they are diluting our vote, our power of our citizens here in Michigan. So we are losing representation at that federal level because of these other states, because of their policies and Biden's administration allowing these illegals to come in and get counted, where they are now detrimentally impacting every single one of us, Republicans and Democrats alike.
Well, and yeah, I think that's an important issue. Unfortunately, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear or declined to take on the cases that were where that very argument was being made. But I think perhaps it's just, the type of argument being made wasn't the best. And, there's always the opportunity to try and bring that issue again in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. The unfortunate thing is, regardless, for all of us, we have this oath of office. We have a constitutional oath, and I really wanted to ask you about some things related to that. But quite frankly, I have a starving child who is going to be laying on the couch, like she hasn't eaten in 3 months. But anyway, because I told her 1 o'clock, but. It's important that in all the topics we talked about, and we talked about the 3 branches of government, we talked about state, federal, county, local officials, there's been officials that are appointed and elected. We need to make sure that we're, as people, let alone as, an attorney general or any other person, that we're aware that all officers have to take a constitutional oath. It's required under Article 6 of our U.S. Constitution and Article 11, Section 1 of our state constitution, MCL 15.151, Michigan state laws. There's, oh goodness, I can't remember. There's like 5 USC Section 333. 5, I think is what it is. But anyway, there's federal statutes, state statutes, there's U.S. and Michigan constitutions. We have to take an oath of office, no matter what branch, no matter what level of government. If you're in government, even if you don't get paid, if you're a volunteer that just, you're there volunteering to sweep the floors in your local library, you have to take an oath of office in order to have an official role at that government building or with that position. You have to take that oath to support and defend the U.S. and, in this case, state constitutions. Not only that, that we have to realize there are state laws in Michigan and quite frankly, in every other state. But in Michigan specifically, there are state laws on the books that talk about the oath of office. And there's been a lot of discussion about, well, if somebody doesn't take their oath, what happens? And are there repercussions? And Stand Up Michigan was backing this whole Valentine's Day, dossier they wanted people to bring to prosecuting attorneys and tell them to do this and that. And they were really off the mark. The intent behind it was good, but they missed something that would have teeth. And that is that if you look at chapter 201 of our MCLs, MCL 201.3, MCL 201.31, and 201.35. If you have any person who is in an office. That office, this is the wording of the state statute, every office shall become vacant on, and it lists a few different things that happen that would create a vacancy automatically. Number 7, his refusal, the office holder's refusal or neglect to take his oath of office, or to give or renew the official bond. And that was the Stand Up Michigan focus was on the bonds. But anyway,
there is another section about the bonds somewhere that says if somebody fails to do a bond, then there is no consequence. I don't know if that supersedes that. I think it does. And there was like $150 fine. Because I looked that up at the time when people were trying to say in revoking bonds and bonds of office.
I would be curious because I researched this thoroughly 2 years ago and they can't get out of it.
There was something recently and I saw it and I can try to send it to you. And it was bonds of office holders and maybe for specific, not everybody of where that. And it was, I know, especially for the Secretary of State, Lieutenant Governor, something else. If they don't do the bond, it doesn't affect them taking office.
Well, as far as my
but I don't know where your question was going.
Yeah, it's always been I haven't been emphasizing so much on the bonds, but it's just found in the same statute. My emphasis has been on the oath of office. And if someone has not taken that oath of office, either because they refused to do so, they refused to say, I solemnly swear that I will support and defend the U.S. Constitution and the state Constitution of the state of Michigan. If they're refusing, or they just forget, they neglect, they whatever, they just haven't done it. It doesn't say there has to be a whole court case. It literally says the office is vacant because the constitutional oath is required before anyone can take that office. So those other statutes I mentioned, 0.31. That says that every statewide office, elected or appointed, except for state or federal legislators or judges, but everything else, the governor fills that vacancy. But, and this is where you come in, if it is a county office, elected or appointed, and there is one of those vacancies, then there is this procedure. If it's a judgeship, if it's a prosecuting attorney, whatever, it has to have those specific things. But every other office that's not one of those specific ones, whether somebody's appointed or elected, if there's a vacancy because they didn't take their oath of office before they took office, it's the probate judge, the county clerk, and the prosecuting attorney that has to appoint a suitable person to fill the vacancy for the remainder of that term. So this is something that whoever takes the new AG position, they need to be up on what our state law already says and already requires. And because there are 82, there's violations of this in different respects, usually within the health department, for 82 out of the 83 Michigan counties currently. And there have been people that were trying to have the county prosecutors do what the rest of the laws in between say that the prosecutors are supposed to do, and the prosecutors haven't done anything, while the attorney general in that respect is the overseer of the county prosecutors. And whoever wins that position needs to put all of them on notice. It is their duty, like you mentioned earlier with the criminal abortion statute, it is their duty to enforce, defend whatever law that's applicable. And in this case, there were formal requests made to pursue that. Once they know that's a thing, they can't just ignore it. They can't say, oh, the oath of office isn't that important to me. It's no big deal. I've got other cases I want to work on. It's not an option. So anyway, just something to throw at you. I wanted to have more back and forth discussion on it, but it's such a huge topic. It could take, we could take 2 hours.
Next time.
Right. So anyway, so if you want to tell people, because I know that there were some questions, somebody was asking who they were. The 3 individuals that have to together fill a vacancy of a county position, and I've seen this happen in Ionia County before. We had, anyway, I won't go there. But anyway, so the probate judge, and the county clerk and the prosecuting attorney. Those three sit as essentially a committee, and they have to decide together on who they're going to appoint to fill a vacancy for any county office at all, if there's a vacancy. So anyway, that answers that question.
Yeah, and it depends on the county, actually, and the office, if it has an executive. And with a prosecutor, like Governor Whitmer was appointed prosecutor in Ingham County, and the judges of that circuit are the ones that appoint the prosecutor. But everything else is it's like that, the prosecutor, clerk, and chief probate judge.
Yeah, they're the ones on that little committee. But as far as if there's a vacancy in the prosecuting attorney's office or whatever, that's one of those statutes I didn't go over because it's one of those specific ones. But shoot, I just had there were some questions here. I wanted to tie all this together. Oh no, it's escaping me. Shoot. Oh, so the convention does it officially start on Friday night or is it Saturday morning?
So yeah, it's Saturday. Typically, I think they're allowing district caucuses. I don't think there's any business with any district caucuses. They usually meet Friday night. So the convention starts at 10 a.m. Saturday the 22nd. I think registration check-in is also Friday night, Saturday morning before the official. It starts at 10 a.m. I'm having an event Friday night, so you can meet me, come ask questions at Atwater Brewery. That will be from 7 to 10 p.m. Friday night.
And is it in Grand Rapids this year?
Yes, in Grand Rapids.
Okay, so your event, is it also in downtown Grand Rapids?
Yep, right across from just north of the DeVos Center. That's where the convention is taking place.
And I told my husband for all the years that we were either delegates or alternates to the state convention, and I was a candidate for state rep years ago, and then most recently when I left, I was a township trustee. I was a state committee woman for the Michigan Republican Party and second congressional district committee woman, all that. And then this year they're having the convention in Grand Rapids, which was fairly close to where we were. I just said the irony is it doesn't escape me. So I know that they've had it in Grand Rapids before, but it just seems like so many other times we were either going to Lansing or we were going to Mackinac, and it was like never in Grand Rapids. So how interesting. But so anyway, those of you who are wondering about that, the key votes happening, the key roles or positions being voted on, that's the Secretary of State Republican nominee, the AG Republican nominee, and Secretary of State. Are there three?
There's three. Three candidates: Christina Caramo, Cindy Berry, and State Representative Bo LaFave.
And Christina Caramo is the best by far candidate. I've had some dealings with the others in various capacities, generally limited, but in any event, I could tell you without any doubt that she is the best person for the job. And funny enough, Trump agreed with me. So that's interesting. And in the AG's office, like we mentioned a few times now, there are three candidates. Tom Leonard, who used to be the
Speaker of the House.
Speaker of the House. Thank you very much. When I was running for state rep,
he ran last time and was our nominee. Lost to Dana Nessel.
Yes, he was the Republican nominee for Michigan Attorney General, and I voted for him. And I was, trying to get people to support him. I was out there, supporting his campaign.
Me too.
And Matt DePerno, who I've supported in different respects with his election integrity lawsuits and things that he was doing. He's also running. They're very good guys. But if any of you are wondering at all, my conclusion is that although any of the three of these guys would be a far better choice than Nessel, and whoever wins this Republican nomination, I will support to beat Nessel. No qualms about it. But in getting us to that point, I would strongly recommend pursuant to my ethical obligations as an attorney, talking to the public and informing the public, I would strongly recommend that you guys support and try to help Ryan get into that position as Republican nominee for Michigan Attorney General. I mean, it's obvious, as with anyone, that you're never going to completely agree on things. My husband will tell you that even he and I definitely never completely agree on things. However, we agree on the important things, and at least most of the important things. And so, although the other two would be good in a variety of respects, I do think that Ryan is going to be, I feel like there should have been a Ryan that was running for Secretary of State. But anyway, just because there's an AG and a governor candidate. And anyway, but we'll change Christina's name to Ryan. But Ryan would do the best job there. So with that being said, this week, every Wednesday, I have a Wednesday Way to Get Involved challenge. And I'll go through that. Sorry, guys, I have the electricians back here working, if you guys can hear that in the background. But if normally I have something of my own, but I'm going to do it a little different since we have a guest speaker with us today. Ryan, what would you say would be if someone wants to impact what's happening in Michigan and what's going to happen at the Michigan Republican State Convention this very weekend? Hopefully they would choose to support you. But if you choose to support one of the other candidates instead, I would ask you to just apply that to your chosen candidate. But Ryan, what would be the one thing, if you could have someone help you, what is a way to get involved challenge we could give them that would help give you that nomination?
Way to get involved challenge. Tell your friends who are state delegates. That's what it is. It's all about the voting delegates for this weekend to vote for me to become the Republican nominee, who's the Republicans' best chance to actually defeat Dana Nessel. So whether that's, calling them up, looking up, everybody here, whoever's watching in Michigan, has precinct delegates. Unless it's unfilled position, there's somebody in your county. Call up those delegates, look them up, just like if you're calling a representative, telling them to vote a certain way or how you want them to be on a position. These delegates are elected positions. They're the elected representatives for their precinct who are now being elevated, going to the state convention. Contact your precinct delegate. Hopefully you are a precinct delegate, a state delegate. Vote for me, get involved, call them, put it on social media, Facebook. Contact my campaign, contact me. You can call, text, email, anytime, Facebook, elect Ryan Berman, electryanberman.com, handle at elect Ryan Berman. Spread the word that, do your homework, right? I think no matter what, if you look at every candidate, and this is the thing that everybody has to do over any election, any position, whether it's county commission, state rep, you have to look and do your own vetting of those candidates and decide, who is going to represent your values the best. Just like Catherine said, and I said it last night, it's one of those things. It's anybody who's in a relationship, is married, you're not going to agree with somebody 100% of the time, even if you love them more than anything. But us as Republicans, we should be agreeing on stuff the vast majority of the time. And I'm always willing to have that conversations and just like I said, with the Democratic colleagues, of trying to understand where they're coming from to come to that consensus. Yeah, you can't do anything in life without compromise, but you don't compromise on certain things, your constitutional rights, your those core principles. But talk to people, get involved and look at those candidates, who's going to represent your values and also has the best chance to actually get that position, to beat a sitting incumbent attorney general. You don't have to, and we've had to, and I've been a precinct delegate for over a decade and very involved. A lot of times it's, you have to try to compromise that conservative values with electability. Guess what? I'm the most conservative guy in the race and the most electable. There's no compromise with me as a candidate. I may not be your first choice before, look into me, I think everybody is going to be happy with me. And I'm the one really to unite the party, unite the factions, unite the grassroots, the establishment coming together. And I will, as the Republican nominee, I will beat Dana Nessel in November.
And just to reiterate or to clarify to those of you who, you're going to hear it again tomorrow on Wednesday's Way to Get Involved Challenge, but when he was asking you to get in contact with the delegates, let's be clear that not all Republican precinct delegates go to state convention. They're all invited to county convention, and at county convention is where they are elevated to either state convention delegate or a state convention alternate. But in any event, you can get access to who those people are if you wanted to make calls. But it is hard. The party makes it hard to find out who, even when I was elected to state party, it was like an impossible thing to figure out who else was elected, to be able to vote at state convention, et cetera. So at any rate,
if you contact me, I'll tell you who's in your county and give you a list of.
Yep. So that's what I wanted to make clear for people is that if you contact Ryan, if you want to support Ryan and you think that he would be the best man for the job for a Michigan Attorney General, then contact his campaign. And they will give you, if you say, hey, I'm willing to make some phone calls, or I'm willing to knock some doors, or I'm willing to contact people before state convention. First of all, do it right away, which is why I'm not waiting until tomorrow to release the Wednesday's Way to Get Involved Challenge. But also make sure that you're going to follow through, because if they're doing it the right way, they might give you a certain list and say, okay, this is a chunk. Maybe we've already given another chunk to somebody else who's already in your precinct or in your county or whatever. So do try to follow through on that. Now, last week, just so you know, Ryan, last week my challenge was actually to have people either agree to door knock or phone call those people who would be voting on these positions, and do so until they were able to successfully share their position on that person or that candidate with at least 100 people who actually get to vote. Now, obviously, you're not going to have most likely that time to reach that many people between now and Saturday. But I'm going to challenge you to do something in 10 or 20 or 25, something. We're gonna make it specific before tomorrow. But I just wanted to at least give Ryan the opportunity as the current candidate to share something that he feels would be the best help to get him in that position. So basically sharing the information as much as you possibly can. Go to his Facebook page, share that. I think all the candidates have ads out there on Facebook. Find one of those ads, share the ad, share his website, text it to your friends and family. Even if they're not somebody who's voting, or you're not sure if they're voting at state convention, you don't know that they might, share it on to somebody else who is, or just seeing it shared, or if you're tagging somebody on Facebook, for example, who, is just a friend of yours and not necessarily going to convention, that could itself bring up the algorithms to get it then in front of more people who are, in fact, people who are going to vote at state convention this weekend. So every little bit does help. Don't feel like you're just one in a sea of many and your voice and your efforts won't matter. Every little bit does help. Man, it has been nearly 2 hours. So we are going to let you all go. We appreciate all of you being on Facebook and YouTube and Rumble, joining us live today. Those of you who will check this out later on our other social media platforms. If you do have any follow-up questions that you have for Ryan that we were not able to cover today, please make sure to reach out. Again, your contact information, Ryan, is
Ryan at electryanberman.com. If you go to electryanberman.com, you have my phone number, email, or just hit me up Facebook, type in Ryan Berman. I'm very accessible. So whatever means, remember, elect Ryan Berman, you'll find me.
For those of you who might try to reach me, don't try to reach me through Facebook. My messenger broke, no joke, in May of 2020 because I had, I guess, way too many people trying to message me. So I haven't been able to see a single message come through in the last 2 years on Facebook. But please do get involved. And if you're still undecided, do your homework. I mean, take the time, look at the 3 candidates, or as much as I really wouldn't want you to do this, if you trust me and you trust my judgment, then hear my words that I think that Ryan Berman is the best guy for the job for Michigan AG this go round, even though the other 2 would be much better than keeping Dana Nessel. And while we're at it, go and support the other Ryan, Ryan Kelly for governor. He's a friend of mine. And at first when he was running, I wasn't too sure if he would end up being the best candidate, primarily because I didn't know who else would be running. But hands down, he would be the best candidate for governor. I also don't agree with everything that he does either. But, you know, like I said, I'm still married to my husband and we disagree on a daily basis. So please vote for the Ryans. Please support Christina for Secretary of State, and keep fighting for freedom in whatever way, capacity, and geographic location that you can. Thank you to you, Ryan, for taking your time. This went much longer than I wanted to, but man, we were able to cover a lot. You were able to share your thoughts on a lot of things, and we'll get this in front of tons of people right away today. So
yeah, no, I appreciate it and appreciate your support, and always enjoy our talks. And I remember talking to you for hours and hours going over things, and it always seems it goes by really quick.
Just a funny thing to leave you guys on. I had many hours of conversations with Ryan over the phone in the first week, well, all throughout April of 2020, trying to get the legislature to not extend Whitmer's executive orders again. And it was just a very small handful of people that were willing, as Republicans, to say, you know what, maybe we shouldn't extend these executive orders again. At any rate, so I knew him quite well over the phone, never had seen him in person, and never bothered to look up his, official picture on the state legislature website or anything. There we are on April 30th, 2020, and I'm in the hallway in front of the Michigan House of Representative chamber, and Lee Chatfield was unconstitutionally shutting the doors of the state legislature. Article 4, Section 20 of the state constitution says the doors must be open unless the public safety requires otherwise, but he wasn't trying to protect the public. Anyway, long story short, there was a lot of animosity, and people all over the nation saw, a lot of these angry militia looking dudes screaming and yelling and hollering at the redcoats, the Capitol Security, and state police that were there that day. And I was right in the middle of it all. Didn't realize my husband wasn't right behind me until it was like all over. And I'm like, what the heck? Where did my husband go? But anyway, he apparently thought I could handle myself even without a gun that day. But I happened to notice there was this guy who looked like he was Secret Service. No joke. And, the little United States pin and all this other stuff. And I'm like, dang, what is the Secret Service doing here? And anyway, I don't remember how it came out to be, but apparently at some point in there, Ryan decided he'd walk forward and hand me his card. And it was that point I looked down and I realized, oh, that dude's not Secret Service. That is State Rep Ryan Berman, who I've been talking to this whole time. So it was just, it was kind of funny.
You know what? I was the only representative to come out, and I came out of the chambers to talk to everybody, and who was, they were rightfully upset, rightfully out there doing their constitutional right to protest, and came out to try to alleviate some of the concerns, tell them it's all about communication, what exactly was going on. And that normally, because they were shouting, let us in, on any normal day, only representatives are allowed on the House floor. And up until recently, you can have guests on the House floor, and they suspended that, like I said, until recently. But going out, I'm like, hey, on a normal day, you wouldn't be allowed on the House floor. I was elected as a representative to be your voice in there. I'm listening to your voice out here, and I am going to be your voice in there, which I was. And, one of those things is it started getting pretty contentious with the officers, and, where they called in reinforcements. And I didn't want to see any problems. And yeah, it ended up making national news anyways. But I mean, luckily there was nothing violent, no arrests, any type of clashes. But again, being on both sides, and I've being as an activist, now as an attorney, as a reserve officer, I've been in all these different roles. And I, frankly said to some of the more louder individuals in the front, I'm like, hey guys, take a step back, because you go into these officers, it could end up bad. I don't want these officers to get hurt. I don't want you to get hurt. And they're like, we're not going to do anything. And I'm like, but look at all the people. And they, like you said, you look behind you, your husband's gone. All the people crowding in. I said, this is a domino effect. One person trips or gets shoved and it goes, and all of a sudden you're in, and then it's fisticuffs and it can be a problem. I don't want anybody arrested today. And they're like, hey, good point. And they took a step back and gave that buffer zone for those sergeant at arms and the state police that were there. And really,
but as a reminder, Ryan, just so you know, I don't know about what rules might be about getting on the House floor, but if there is something like that, totally violates Article 4, Section 20 of the state constitution. There's no excuses. I don't care what bullshit they have. They cannot stop the public from being able to access the sessions of legislature.
Well, yeah, that's separate. That's the gallery upstairs and being able to be involved.
Right. Well, yeah, but they were stopping. That's what they were doing.
That was upstairs, and that's what they set up as a separate viewing room or something. And it was on, but that again, it was a contentious, time and atmosphere. Got for a minute to calm things down. And then more people came in and ramped things up. But at that point, I went back in, and that's when I got into an argument with our current speaker, Wentworth, who was the pro tem at the time, saying, I'm not, you're going to have a real problem on your hands, not just outside, but here in this chamber, if anybody is going to be voting to extend these powers.
Right. So, and just to be clear with everybody else, there is another state rep there were two that came out. One didn't really talk to the public. That was my then current state rep, Luke Meerman. He came out and he talked to me, and he was able to give me a copy of Senate Bill 858 that they had just voted on. That was afterwards. But the other state rep that came out, he walked in that way and he came out, but most of the talking he did was on his way out. And that was Matt Maddock. And he, straight up lied to all the people there, and I called him out on it right at that time. I'm pretty sure we have it on video. It was going live on a lot of people's different Facebook feeds. That was before I did lives. But at any rate, it's he came out saying that we did this and we did that, and it was all a bunch of lies. So anyway, I think that was even worse. So you were the only one that came out and actually tried to engage with people without feeding them a bunch of lies about what was happening inside. So there were others that came out, but I just wanted to clarify
no problem.
The difference there, because I was really disgusted at the lies that were shared that day and the way that it was done. If you haven't seen the video, Ryan, you'll have to ask me and we'll find it for you it's on my YouTube and Facebook somewhere from 2 years ago. But I mean, Matt comes out there and he's all going like this, hey guys, be all excited. We just voted to sue the governor and to turn down her executive orders, when the exact thing was the opposite. That was Senate Bill 858 that voted, that was approving and putting into law in entirety 32 of her executive orders at the time. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. So anyway, I had some issues with him from that point. So, but anyway, for those of you who hung out here with us all this while, that was just a little bit of interesting stuff, little tidbits and stories to tell you that this is someone that I have seen in the fight, since April of 2020. And I didn't know Ryan before that. Just because we're attorneys doesn't mean I knew him. I never had heard about him at all. And I think it was through State Rep Steve Johnson, who was also one of them that was trying to fight for freedom at the time. And, just started communicating and talking. And so I didn't have any kind of special status. He was talking to me as someone who wasn't even in his own district, but rather a greater Michigan constituent. And so I would encourage you, if you do have questions that are important, that you felt, didn't get addressed or we ran out of time to handle, go ahead and reach out to him and his campaign and check it out. Look at his his website, discussion on issues. There might be some answers already out there, but please do. Oh, my husband is telling me that the video I was just mentioning of Matic is on my YouTube page. And so, yeah, maybe he'll probably, if Lori or him, then one of them will end up posting it. I'm sure the link directly to that video. But anyway, so again, thank you, Ryan. Thank you, everyone else. Appreciate what you all are doing. And have an absolutely wonderful week. Thanks, everyone.